In UN sanctions voted at the Security Council in New York, freeze on assets, basically getting behind the push to isolate Libya. This after on Friday, the Human Rights Council, which was meeting here in a special session, decided to suspend Libya and order an international investigation. Now, many observers thought this was a particularly redeeming moment for the Council, which hasn't always been outspoken. And joining me now to help shed some light on this change, I think it may be described as, is Peter Splinter from Amnesty International. What did the Human Rights Council do on Friday that was so exceptional?
I think what the Human Rights Council did on Friday is it really found its voice. It's the moral voice of the international community. Often it goes in silence, often it squeaks, but on Friday it spoke very loudly, and now it's important that it's found its voice. It applies that voice to other situations, like Guantanamo Bay, like Zimbabwe, like Afghanistan, like Tibet.
And just to return to what was actually decided by the Council, ordering an international investigation, these investigators who will go into Libya and look at possible crimes against humanity, to use the words of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. How does that fit in the UN architecture? We know that the Security Council has called on the International Criminal Court to look into things. What is the significance of that investigation? What's going on in terms of possibly bringing Libyan government members to justice in the future?
Well, there are two parallel processes, the reference to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and the investigation ordered by the Council. But the Council's investigation should be able to do fact-finding that feeds into the broader investigation. Both of them will send a very strong message. The ICC investigation will send a message not just to Muammar Gaddafi and the people acting underneath him, but to others who might be tempted to behave in the same way. It's a very important precedent.
So the announcement, I mean, the logic is these announcements will dissuade people who are firing on protesters or ordering the firing on protesters to stop and to think otherwise and to basically give up. Is that?
Well, I don't know about give up. The way of the world isn't quite so neat and clean, but I think it will have some dissuasive effect, especially if the international community, not just the Human Rights Council, but the Security Council and other parts of the UN, are able to build on the important precedents that were established last Friday and on the weekend with Libya.
Okay, thank you. That was Peter Splinter of Amnesty International telling us about the significance of what's been decided here at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Nick Spicer, reporting there live from Geneva at that meeting of the UN Human Rights Council. We are expecting to hear from more foreign ministers, including the Foreign Minister of Tunisia, as well as the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And we'll bring that to you, of course, live here on Al Jazeera as it happens. Let's now get the latest from eastern Libya. Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdelhamid is in the city of Benghazi and joins us now live. Hoda, tell us about the situation there. The east, of course, pretty much under protesters' control now. What's the situation like, and where is all this heading?
Well, I think that's the big question everybody is asking. At the moment, you could describe Benghazi and the rest of eastern Libya as a peaceful area, but people don't know whether, as you'd actually heard now, there was some gunfire, but people here don't really know whether this is going to actually head to the success of the uprising or whether this is a lull before maybe a counter-offensive by the government in Tripoli. So people are on edge. They have celebrated a little bit what they call the liberation of Benghazi, but to give you an indication about how worried they are, schools are still shut, universities are shut, most businesses are shut. Banks have opened yesterday for a few hours, today again, but there's still, I would say, people are taking very much their own precautions.
And so, as you said, Benghazi, one of the first cities, in fact, to fall. Are there any plans there in Benghazi and other eastern cities to take over other Gaddafi strongholds like Sirte?
Well, certainly we have heard about calls to try to rally people, to move people to the west of the country. We've heard that through tribal leaders calling on their people to rally, and also through a Radio Free Libya, which is set now here in Benghazi and sort of broadcasts all over the country. But it is a very difficult mission. As you mentioned, Sirte, well, to go to Sirte, you will have to face a fight with the elite forces of this country. Those are elite forces forces that are under the command of the children of Gaddafi, and everybody will tell you that they are much better equipped, much better trained, and much more loyal to the regime than the army was. They do say, for example, here that they now have helicopter gunships and several jet fighters, but for them to use them would mean probably to have to face the risk of surface-to-air missiles, which the regime has and the opposition doesn't have. To go by road means most probably to get into a huge confrontation with people who are less equipped. So it is a very, very difficult mission. People here try as much as they can, especially through this National Council, to keep in contact with the West part, to sort of give support as much as they can to the West, to explain to the Western towns and cities that as soon as they're held in opposition hands, well, then they can count on the support and join the National Council that has been formed here in Benghazi. But people will also tell you that in the West it's more difficult because this country is based more on tribal allegiances than national identity. Right. You will find tribes in the West that will still help the regime of Gaddafi.
But many of these tribes, Hoda, have in fact now given up their support for Gaddafi. We're hearing of defections in the army. I mean, how much support does Muammar Gaddafi still have today? Who is there that's still propping him up today?
Well, if you speak to people, they will tell you that each time Gaddafi appears on television, they do listen to what he has to say, as much as they do look at who is around him at the moment. Traditionally, the people who used to be around him during his public appearances, like senior figures of the government, like Kazaf al-Dam, his cousin who has now defected, are not there anymore. But he is surrounded by his close family, people from his own tribe, or actually from the branch of his own tribe. Some people would tell you the fact that Kazaf al-Dam, his cousin, has deserted means that also that within his own tribe there is some sort of a split, since he is heading another branch of that tribe. He still has his sons, as I said earlier. He still has the paramilitary elite forces. So he does still have power that is not to be understated, or even though territorially he might be at the moment isolated to Tripoli and Sirte.
Okay, thank you very much, Hoda Abdelhamid, reporting there live from the Libyan city of Benghazi. Thanks, Hoda. Now, meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency says it's facing a humanitarian emergency as foreigners pour out of Libya. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees says close to 100,000 migrant workers have fled Libya in the past week. It says most of them have moved to Egypt and Tunisia. But labour groups say tens of thousands of Asians are still stuck in Libya. The Philippines foreign minister went to Libya himself despite being warned against it. Albert Del Rosario led the evacuation of some 400 workers. We asked his spokesman earlier if they had any contact with the Gaddafi regime before going in.
I'm not aware of prior arrangements having been made with the Libyan government, and it was not his intention to meet with Libyan officials. And what he did was simply to go to our relocation sites, because we are very much concerned about the security situations over there, particularly how it impacts on our Filipino overseas workers. And before the end of that day, before nightfall, he was able to bring out about 400 of our Filipino nationals. We think that we have been able to evacuate most, if not all, of our nationals in Tripoli who would like to leave the country. On the other hand, we do know that there are about 1,500 Filipino nationals who are awaiting evacuation in the port city of Benghazi, and we have made arrangements for a Greek-owned vessel chartered by us to proceed to Benghazi tomorrow and pick them up.
Bangladesh's government has been criticized over not helping its citizens. Around 60,000 Bangladeshis are trapped in Libya. Their relatives have been protesting in the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka. Edmund Bond is a human rights lawyer.
I think that whole region has now become some sort of a time bomb, and it's necessary that all countries actually pour in assistance and try and reduce the refugee count. But I think the problem about dealing with foreigners, people not of the same country, will lead to complications with governments. And I think at the moment, in respect of the Bangladeshi foreign workers, it's an imperative. 60,000 is a huge, huge number.
Moving on to Tunisia now, where there's been another change of leadership. Former government minister AlBaiji Qaid al-Sebsi is now the country's new prime minister. Mohamed Ghannouchi resigned as interim prime minister on Sunday following a swell of unrest. But is a new name going to satisfy protesters? Nadim Baba reports.
A surprise announcement as Tunisia's interim president names a new prime minister.
At this critical moment, in order to maintain our national interest and to ensure that the state is up and running with all its institutions, I requested Mr. Baja Qaid Sibsi to assume the office of Prime Minister, and he thankfully accepted this responsibility.
AlBaiji Qaid al-Sebsi is 84 and a former foreign minister. He served under Tunisia's post-independence leader Habib Bourguiba and under President Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali. His appointment came hours after interim Premier Mohamed Ghannouchi unexpectedly stepped down.
I am not prepared to be the person who takes decisions which result in the loss of life.
The move comes at a tense time for Tunisia. Sunday saw new clashes between protesters and security forces in Tunis. Several people have reportedly been killed on the streets of the capital since Friday. Mohamed Ghannouchi took over as premier on the 14th of January after President Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia following weeks of protests. Critics say that since the Jasmine Revolution, there's not been real reform, and Ghannouchi's replacement is unlikely to change that.
He's out of touch, he's out of time, he's belonging other generation. What the Tunisian youth need today, who someone will be able to represent them, who someone will be able to respond to their legitimate demands.
Mohamed Ghannouchi has repeated the government's pledge to hold elections by mid-July. But almost 200 people have been arrested over the weekend. It's not clear how far the new Prime Minister can quell the anger on the streets. Nadim Baba, AlJazeera.
Opposition leaders are continuing to demand a greater pace of reform in Jordan. That's despite the promise of new laws this year by the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, supporters of King Abdullah gathered in Amman on Sunday, at least 5,000 people showing their allegiance to the royal family. The Loyalists rally comes after opposition protests that have been held on 8 consecutive Fridays. Protesters in Oman are blocking roads to the country's main export port, and a supermarket was burning after being looted on Monday, according to witnesses. The government has pledged more jobs and unemployment benefits in response to the protests. Doctors say 6 people were killed in Sohar on Sunday. In Bahrain, a parliament meeting has been cancelled as protesters stopped upper chamber members from reaching the entrance. Rallies have been held in key Manama locations to put pressure on the monarchy to bring change. King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa has reshuffled his cabinet and appealed for talks with the opposition. 2 soldiers are dead in Yemen after an attack at a military checkpoint in the Abiyan province. Opposition parties have joined young protesters in trying to bring down their president. Thousands of protesters are out on the streets in various cities demanding an end to President Ali Abdullah Saleh's 32-year rule. Hashem Ahelbara has more from the capital, Sana'a, where the president is trying to show up support.
Remaining defiant, President Saleh telling his army officers that Yemen is in danger of disintegration and that they should fight for its unity.
We have vowed to defend the republican system, the unity and safety of the republic till the last drop of our blood, and this vow stands now. There is an attempt to split the country into north and south.
The president was referring to his arch rivals, secessionists asking the south to break away from the north, and the Houthi rebels in their ongoing battle against the government for greater autonomy in their region.
This isn't the first time that the president has met his army generals since the start of the crisis in the country.
But his statements tell a great deal about his confusion, and it's clear that he has been inspired by Gaddafi's speeches.
But thousands of young Yemenis who have taken to the streets across the country have totally different demands. The departure of the regime. Demands waved off by Saleh's ruling party as illegitimate.
It won't be an Egyptian-style change. It won't be a Tunisian type of change.